The first night, the forest pressed in like a held breath, and Wren Alder counted her own breaths to keep from crying. She was 7 months pregnant and down to the last $28 in her checking account, fingers raw from hauling boxes up the porch steps of a cabin so small it looked like a toy someone forgot to put away. A summer storm gathered in the distance, and the smell of wet pine threaded through the evening like a promise or a warning. She couldn't tell which. She set the final box on the threshold and fumbled for the key the probate lawyer had mailed, taped to a polite letter on heavy paper. "We regret your Aunt Iris's passing. According to her will, you are the sole beneficiary of the property known as North Pines Parcel B, including the cabin at 311 Alder Run Road." The key was cold and rough in her hand. It stuck in the lock, resisted, then finally gave with a reluctant click. She should have felt relief for the first time in months. Instead, Wren stepped into the cabin and felt how empty there was. Dust motes hung in the air like a constellation without a sky. The floors were old fir, sturdy and scarred. Something metallic and sweet lingered faintly, the ghost of a memory she didn't own. The last light of evening slipped in through a single west window, blessing the table and nothing else. She slid the eviction notice out of her backpack and laid it on that sunlit table as if it were a sleeping animal. Her landlord, back in Eugene, had been apologetic but firm. Her job at the plant nursery had evaporated when the owners downsized in June, and the savings she and Avery had built before he decided he wasn't ready to be a father had melted faster than snow. In the morning, a rental truck would come for her furniture and hold it somewhere under a tarp in a warehouse that smelled like rubber and resignation. "Okay," she said to the empty room. "It's you and me now, little bean." Her hand slid across the tight roundness under her shirt. She'd named the life inside her ember in her head because that's what it felt like. Some heat she refused to let go cold. "We are not breaking," she whispered, a vow to herself, to the table, to the walls. "We are not." Quick pause. If you love getting lost in stories like this and want one every day, hit like and subscribe. It really helps me keep these coming. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how these stories find you all over. Wren propped the front door open and went back down the steps to wrestle 2 more boxes off the back seat of her battered Camry. The car sagged with the load and smelled unavoidably like fast food fries soaked into the seat fabric from a former life. The chirring of crickets rose in waves, and something deep in the trees called once, a long, low hoot that made the hair lift on her arms. She returned to the threshold juggling boxes and her water bottle, and something else caught at the corner of her eye. Not movement. More like the water shifting under a leaf when there's a fish beneath it. Wren froze, heartbeat in her throat. The cabin interior was darker now, the slanting light gone, shadows braided together in the corners. She breathed. Nothing. "Get a grip," she told herself and bumped the door shut with her hip. The cabin accepted her with a long creak, like an old woman easing into a chair. It smelled like dust and dried lilac, as if someone had once kept linen sachets in drawers, and the memory of them persisted. There wasn't much by way of furniture. A narrow iron bed under the north window, a 2-burner propane stove, the table, 2 mismatched chairs, a faded rug bloom-patterned with time. The ceiling beams were exposed and scored with tiny knife cuts, tally marks, or just a bored hand passing time. On the far wall, above a blackened potbelly stove, someone had tacked up a charcoal drawing of a stand of hemlocks by a stream. The artist had signed it with a simple I. A storm padded up to the cabin and settled on the roof with a hiss. Wren made herself a peanut butter sandwich because it didn't require cooking, and rationed her bottled water like she'd done when she was a kid on long road trips with a mother who forgot to stop often. This wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what she thought 31 would look like. but she had a roof for the night and a good pair of legs, and the doctor had told her Ember was growing strong. She was rinsing the peanut butter knife over a bowl when she heard the first footstep on her porch. The floorboards outside the door bowed with weight. Wren's body tightened like someone had pulled a drawstring through her spine. She set down the knife and reached for her phone, useless as a dead moth without a signal this far up the mountain. The door handle turned and stopped against a latch she'd just slid in place. Another footstep joined the first, then 3 more, the wood complaining under them. Wren's mind flattened to a single word. No. She didn't have a weapon besides a can of bear spray somewhere in a box labeled kitchen stuff. Probably. She didn't have a neighbor within shouting distance. The window over the sink had a view of ferns and a fallen log slick with moss. Her throat felt like someone had put a hand around it and politely held. "Hello?" A male voice through the wood. It was polite. That, somehow, was worse. "Anyone inside?" Wren didn't answer. The voice tried again. "This is a private survey. We need to check the interior before we can—" Another voice, lower, impatient. "Just open it." The latch lifted once, twice. The man outside had come prepared. The bolt slid, not an accident, and the door eased inward. The smell of rain and damp wool and mail hung like another shadow as 5 men stepped one after another into her 900 square feet like it was theirs. They were strangers. That much was instant electric fact. The first was tall with a shaved head, rain streaming off a field jacket, a clipboard in his hand because he wanted to look official. The second had a gray-flecked beard and the flat eyes of a man who enjoyed closing doors without asking who's behind them. The third was younger, jittery in a way that read to Wren as cigarettes and bad choices. The fourth and fifth could have been brothers, both with the lean, roped look of men who worked outdoors at things that bent their backs and made them sure of themselves. No one had the right to be here. "I didn't invite you," Wren said, and was surprised when her voice came out even. "Get out." The shaved headman glanced at her belly and changed his expression by a fractional degree, softening the edges. It didn't fool her. "Ma'am, we're here on behalf of Danvers Timber Holdings. This property is slated for rezoning. There's a question about the boundaries and This property belongs to me," she said. She tipped her chin towards the letter on the table. "Aunt left it to me. I have a key. You had to use something that wasn't a key to get in, so I'll say it one more time. Get out." The bearded man smiled without humor. "Boundaries are funny things. They look one way on paper, another in the woods. If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind us looking around." The baby shifted under her skin as if it were pressing its face toward the sound of these men. Wren felt an animal part of herself wake up, something older than mortgage notices or polite letters on heavy paper. She took a small step sideways towards the counter and found the can of bear spray under a dish towel like she had known all along it would be there. The universe did hand you small mercy sometimes if it had stolen the big ones. "You open one more door, take one more step, and I will empty this in your eyes," she said softly. "I will do it for me, and I will do it for the little one in here who didn't ask to be in this conversation." A beat, something like respect, flickered across the shaved headman's face. He lifted both hands, palms out. "No need for that. We'll be quick. We're just looking for a—" "A what?" Wren asked. The way he trailed off felt rehearsed. "Some old papers. The previous occupant failed to file some things. We're cleaning up the record." "My aunt had a name," Wren said, heat rising into her cheeks despite the cabin's chill. "It was Iris, and you need to leave." The younger, jittery one had already drifted toward the back wall, eyes scanning the beams, the window frame, the place where the rug didn't quite cover the floorboards. Wren's gut said he'd been here before, or someone had told him exactly what to look for. "Time to go," she said, and took one, slow step, then another, to put herself between them and whatever it was they thought they were entitled to. The bearded man's eyes flared with irritation, but the leader gave a small headshake. The fourth man muttered something under his breath that sounded like an insult and a prayer stitched together. "We'll be back with papers," the leader said. "Proper ones. Might be best if you were elsewhere when we come." Wren smiled, showing her teeth. "I'll consider that," she said. "Right after you consider I'll call the sheriff the second you step off this porch. Good luck with the signal." The bearded one's lip curled. Wren didn't blink. "You'd be surprised what people can hear when the woods get loud," she said, and let a little of the bear spray's promise tilt the can toward them like punctuation. They went. The last one took a meaningful look at the drawing of hemlocks like it held a secret. Then he turned his shoulder and followed the rest into the rain, boots sending up dull thunking on the boards. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Wren stood very still until their footsteps were far enough away to be part of the weather. Then she lowered herself onto the chair and shook in small private tremors that she let happen, because if she didn't, they would live under her skin and make a home there. "What would you do?" she whispered into the dim, to her aunt's empty chair, to Ember's patient heartbeat. "If your only hope was hidden in a place everyone else forgot?" She didn't sleep. She put water to boil on the stove and made tea she didn't want just to have something warm to hold. When the storm moved on and the night spread out in its wake like black cloth, she lit the old lantern she'd found in a box in the closet just to see if it would. It did, its flame small and determined. She watched it and thought about the 5 men and the way one of them had looked at the drawing above the stove. At 2 in the morning, because the body does what it remembers how to do even when the mind is tired, she moved. She pulled back the rug, slowly, as if she might wake something. Underneath, the floorboards showed a stain where some long-ago spill had sunk into the wood, and next to it, a faint series of shallow scratches that probably were nothing, unless they were everything. Wren got to her knees and ran her fingertips along the board edges. One gave so slightly her breath stopped. She looked around the room as if to confirm she was alone, which she was, unless you counted the portrait of hemlocks watching her like a set of elegant witnesses. She found the flathead screwdriver in a box labeled junk drawer, a small miracle in and of itself, and levered the board up gently. Dust, the kind that had grown here itself and was not tracked in. A space, not deep. Something that had once been wrapped in oilcloth, but the cloth had rotted, and what remained was more like a patient, damp map of itself. Inside, under the dust and the shredded cloth, was a wooden box, unadorned, the kind a person might make in a long winter for the simple pleasure of making something true. It had a brass latch and a loop for a padlock, but no lock. "Hi," Wren said, absurdly, and lifted it out into the lamplight. The box's hinges complained softly when she opened it. Inside lay a bundle of papers tied up with faded blue ribbon, brittle and curled at the edges like old leaves. On top of the bundle, someone had tucked a sprig of dried something. Fern, Wren thought. Fern pressed and forgotten, its tiny fingers shadowed into the paper beneath it. Under the bundle, against the bottom of the box, was a small leather-bound book with a strap and a tarnished buckle, no bigger than Wren's palm. The ribbon came apart like a sigh. The topmost paper was a letter addressed in a neat hand. "To the one who loves this place after me." The date, written in the corner, was October 12th, 1940. Wren read by lantern light with her back against the iron bed, her legs drawn up, the baby shifting and settling as if it too were listening. The writer's name, signed at the bottom of the first letter, was Elowen, not Iris. Elowen Merritt, if the flourished last name spelled itself the way Wren thought it did, though the ink had bled in places, becoming something like a watercolor of words. Dear one, Elowen had written, if these pages find your hands, then you already know loss in some shape. That is the only reason a person opens a box they did not know was theirs. They have nowhere else to put their grief. I have hidden this where the kind of men who come with papers will not look. Men like that do not kneel. They do not reach their hands into dark places where spiders keep the house. They do not plan for the long story. We do. Wren surprised herself by whispering, yes, to a woman who had likely been dead longer than her mother had been alive. Elowen wrote in a narrow, careful hand, big loops on her lowercase l's that made Wren like her immediately. She told the story without asking permission from the past to tell it. They came in November of last year and told me my father had signed our grove away. I told them my father did no such thing. He was buried in June with his hands folded neat. They showed me a deed anyway, and there was his scrawl, a poor imitation of his name that made my mouth fill with the taste of pennies. They brought their own notary. They brought a bottle of whiskey and a warm pie from the diner, neither of which made theft sweeter, but they smiled as if it did, and said it was fair. A fair market price, Mr. Danvers said, his neat hair catching the light as if it were oily with God's own favor. There were 5 of them. I watched them stand in this room and divide my home into squares with their eyes. Danvers with his patent leather boots that never once found mud in their lives. Strickland, whose laugh was a metal thing. Malley, with the spit always gathering in the corners of his mouth like he could not contain himself. Brenner, who did not meet my eye because he had been a boy here once, and remembered taking a biscuit from my mother at our table. And Holt, quiet, thinner than the others, named for a grove. I would have given him a kindness if he hadn't already given his away. They came with rain on their hats, and left with a folded paper they said would keep peace in the town. They said the war coming would need wood. Even a woman should know that much, they said, and then smiled as if they hadn't handed me a grief I did not know where to put. When they left, I wiped their footprints off the floor with vinegar and hot water until the boards shone again, and my anger floated away in steam and then condensed on the window panes like a thing with no place to go. It was the notary who made me suspicious. He signed with the wrong hand. My father wrote with his right until the day he died. The man had forged what he could not own, not even in his imagination. Men like that want the deed because they do not love what the deed names. They love the paper because it looks like a miracle. It is not. The land is the miracle, and I will keep our miracle safe. So here is what I did. Wren turned the page with a care that bordered reverence. Her whole body had tightened when Elowen listed the men. It wasn't rational, but something in Wren's bones recognized the names like the way you recognize a snake, even if you've only ever seen a picture. The last names, Danvers, Strickland, Malley, Brenner, Holt, tugged at some thread in the county's present that Wren hadn't yet learned, but she would. Elowen described slipping a real deed. The original patent her grandfather had received from the state in 1899, recorded and proper, out of the wooden box that had sat on the mantel since before she was born. She described the way her grandfather had traced the seal with his finger when he was telling stories about how a man could be poorer than a church mouse and still be rich as a king if he could name the trees on his land the way he named his children. I took the paper, Elowen wrote, and all the letters that proved our rights, the timber rights, the mineral rights we never used because we knew better, the title itself, and I made myself a map. Not the kind that shows a road like a line of beads, the kind that a person can read only if they have lived here long enough to watch the creek split like a wishbone each spring. I am not a coward. But I realized something about fear when the 5 men left. You can use it like a tool if you do not let it use you. So I hid what mattered where even my own hands would forget to look if I was scared. I put a sign here for someone who will come after me, and then I tuck the truth where the cold keeps secrets well. Under the pressed fern were other letters. One addressed to Aunt Iris, the only person whose name Wren recognized, dated from late fall of 1940, the ink somehow bluer even in the lamplight. Iris, if I leave here, and I may for a while when the cutting starts, I am trusting you with my stubborn heart. Watch for the mark on the beam above the stove. 3 cuts deepen where time won't erase. The rest I cannot say all at once. Paper is a betrayer when men like these carry it in their pockets. But you know the story under the story. You know the spring. Wren set the letter down, throat thick. The beam above the stove caught the lantern light. The knife scores she'd noticed earlier suddenly transformed into a whisper from a person who had stood right where she was standing and said, "I will not be erased." She ran her hand over her belly again and felt a heel or elbow nudge her. "I guess we're looking for a spring," she said to Ember and Elowen at once. The little leather book's strap had stiffened with time, but the buckle yielded with a sound like a breath let go. The first pages were covered in Elowen's neat hand. Daily weather, notes about the garden, names of the blackberries on the East Ridge like they were proper nouns. August star, widow's thumb, fox's feast. Wren smiled despite herself, despite the knot of adrenaline that had not yet unwound since the 5 men had left. But scattered between the ordinary entries were others, riddle-like. Some of the pages had been torn out cleanly, as if Elowen had known someone would look. On September 3rd, 1940, in a slanted hand that suggested she'd been writing at the edge of something, Elowen had written, "When the creek splits like the wishbone, you must not take the big piece. A greedy person will. Go where the birds drink. Under the shelf of stone there is a hole. Do not be afraid of the dark. Use your left hand. Below that, a small 6-pointed star drawn in ink, and beneath the star, a word in block letters, witness." A log shifted outside on the wet ground, or a deer nosed past. Wren's skin prickled. She let the sensation settle. The journal pages smelled like dust and thyme and some faint sweetness that might have been Elowen's soap a lifetime ago. Wren tucked the letters and the book back into the wooden box and slid the floorboard back in place and rolled the rug over it all like she could recover a heartbeat. She slept eventually, a thin, dreamless thing pressed with her clothes on under an old quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and something else she couldn't reach. When she woke, it was white morning, and the world had stepped closer to listen. At the diner in the nearest town, where the coffee was always both better and worse than you remembered, Wren watched a pair of men in baseball caps argue gently about the upcoming county rezoning meeting while the waitress named Betty topped off Wren's cup with a hand that had probably wiped tears she hadn't let fall. "You're new," Betty said, like a fact, and not an accusation. "My Aunt Iris left me her cabin," Wren said, "up on Alder Run." "Ah," Betty's mouth softened. "Iris. Good bones, that woman. She worked the counter here in summers back when my mother ran it. Broke a man's thumbnail once for getting too fresh." She smiled, proud. "You from out there alone?" Wren's hand went automatically to her belly. "Not for long." Betty slid a plate of eggs toward her that Wren had not ordered. "Eat. This place can be sweet if you come at it right, but it doesn't coddle. You need anything, you holler. Betty Granger. That's Milo Hart," she added, nodding toward a young man in a button-down at the end of the counter reading an old map like it was a love letter. He knows every deed in 2 counties, got ahead for all that meets and bounds nonsense. Milo looked up at the sound of his name, pushed his glasses up with a knuckle, and gave Wren an open, curious smile. He had the boyishness of a man who still thought the world could be made into a puzzle that would yield to patience. Wren found herself smiling back, despite the knot in her chest that had lived there all night. Later, when she caught him outside the diner in the bright parking lot morning and said, "Do you have 5 minutes to answer a strange question?" He didn't act like she was asking too much. He stuck his hands into his jacket pockets and said, "If it's about whether the rumors about Danvers are true, the answer's yes and no. Yes, they always push. No, they don't always win." "What do you know about Iris Alder?" she asked. He tilted his head like a bird. Enough to know she scared Danvers more than she let on. She was a quiet kind of fire. "She left me her place," Wren said. 5 men showed up last night. They said they were surveyors for Danvers. They were looking for papers. Milo's mouth tightened. He looked like he wanted to ask 10 questions at once and didn't want to spook whatever this was. "You call sheriff?" "I didn't have a signal," Wren said, aware of how that sounded. "I did have a can of bear spray." "Smart." He studied her for a second with a care that didn't feel invasive. "You shouldn't be up there by yourself with that going on. Polite suggestion." "I'm not by myself," she said, and touched her belly again without meaning to. His face softened a fraction, and then returned to puzzle-solving Milo, as Wren had already started to tag him in her mind. "Look," he said, "if there are missing papers about timber rights or title, Danvers will want them. He's had a burr under his saddle about North Pines forever. He says the boundaries on those old parcels were drawn by someone who loved poetry more than law. What do you think? I think the people who wrote those old meets and bounds descriptions were describing the land they lived on, not the land they wanted to sell." He kicked at a pebble and watched it skitter. "You have anything you want me to see? Like, if you had, and this is hypothetical, a box of letters from someone named Elowen that I could tell you were legally significant but also probably sentimental?" Wren decided on the spot to trust him. It wasn't rational, it was practical in a different way. There was a part of her that chose not to die on a hill alone if someone had a map. She drove Milo up to the cabin on roads that got narrower, and his commentary about old stone fences and why people piled rocks in certain places on their property was oddly soothing. He walked into the cabin and stood in the center and breathed. "Smells like old cedar," he said, and something like lilac. Elowen, Wren thought. Mila crouched and ran a hand along the floorboards like he was greeting a dog. She showed him the box. They sat side by side on the rug like kids and read Elowen's first letter again in silence, the words filling the room gently like fog. Milo's curiosity sharpened like a good knife as he read the list of names. Danvers, Strickland, Malley, Brenner, Holt. He put a finger over the star Elowen had drawn and tapped it twice. "Witness?" he murmured. She knew. Knew what? That paper is God in a courthouse. He looked at Wren. But paper can lie, people know that. So you also need a story and you need time. Elowen had the first and not the second. She went for a third thing. Witness. Proof that outlasts a lie. He reached for the journal like it was half sacred and turned the pages delicately. She's got clue-making in her. Look. He angled the book to the light. Some of the pages looked like nothing. Until they didn't. After a minute, he said softly, "You know she's writing you a map, right?" Wren let herself exhale like she hadn't since the men had stepped into her cabin. "I think she hid the deed at a spring. Widow's Spring. Milo nodded. Widow's Spring, he repeated, like a person tasting a word for the first time. It's a seep under a shelf of stone, a mile upridge, cold as a banker's heart even in August. He tried on a smile that didn't quite hold. I'll take you. I'd say wait while I go, but I'm not inclined to leave you sitting pretty up here with Danvers sniffing around. Thank you, Wren said. The two words felt too small for the size of her relief. Milo's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at it and made a face. Speak of the devil with patent leather shoes, he said. County sent out the agenda for the rezoning meeting. Danvers has wrangled a vote in 2 weeks. Wren did the math automatically. That gave her 14 days to find her way through Elowen's trail. 14 days to lay her hands on something the 5 men couldn't lawyer away. 14 days to take a thing that had been stolen and make it hers. Not because paper made it so, but because the story itself would not be disregarded. And, Milo added, because apparently the universe had decided to hand her all of the urgency at once. The county also posted the delinquent tax sale list this morning. I hate to be the one to... What? Your aunt was 2 years behind. They're going to sell liens in 3 weeks. I can help you file for a delay if you have a medical extenuating circumstance, which... He nodded at her belly with something like apology. You do, but they'll still press. Wren closed her eyes for a second and pictured her mother's hands making bread when there was no money for meat, kneading and kneading like the answer lay in the dough. I can't lose this, she said. Her voice hit something in it that made Milo look away for a half-second like a person giving privacy about something that had happened in plain sight. You won't, he said, with that confidence of the young and the decent. Not if we have anything to say about it. They put on jackets, and Wren laced her boots, and together they stepped outside into the good light of a day that had decided to be clean. They passed under the hemlocks whose scent made Wren think of Elowen's writing, and walked the ridgeline north. The ground underfoot was springy with duff, centuries of needles making a mattress for the living. The air had a silence built into it that made every bird sound pleat neatly into it. Tell me about them, she said as they walked, more to cut through the hum of fear that had set up residence in her chest than for gossip. The 5 last names? Milo asked. History hangs off those like Spanish moss. He hopped a fallen trunk and then turned to offer Wren a hand, and she accepted it, grateful for the steadiness, not ashamed of it. Danvers, you know. Holt is his great-uncle. Strickland died in the 80s, but his son runs the gravel yard. Mally's grandson is on the school board. Brenner? People say one of them tried to make it right once and got sick before he finished it. Heart, or whiskey, or both. Do their sons and grandsons know, Wren asked, that their daddies stole something? Some of them know it the way a person knows their house sits on a sinkhole and they just don't step in the same place twice. Some of them think the story is just a story. He glanced sideways at her. Some think it's their birthright to keep what was stolen because they've had it long enough. I had a boyfriend like that, Wren said, and regretted it instantly. But Milo only smiled in the way of older brothers who have heard 1,000 stories, and boiled them all down to one gentle truth. You deserved better. Widow's Spring was exactly where Elowen would have left it if Elowen was Wren, and Wren was Elowen. It seeped out from under a shelf of rock like the earth was working through a memory. Ferns pushed their fingers into the dampness like elegant thieves. The water was so clear it hurt. Wren crouched, her back twinging with the suddenness of the movement, and ran her fingers into the hole where the spring emerged. They hit smooth stone, cold as an apology you didn't accept. She moved her fingers left because Elowen had said left and found nothing. Milo dropped to his knees beside her and reached in with his right because he was a contrary thing, and then shook his head and laughed. "I should learn to listen," he said, and eased his left hand into the dark and felt. Under the lip of the stone, a hollow. Inside the hollow, nothing. And behind the nothing, the edge of something metal, thin as a whisper. "Got you," he said to the spring like a conspirator and teased a flat tin packet out into the light. It was wrapped in waxed cloth that had gone brittle and clung like a skin. Wren held her breath. Milo glanced at her, eyebrows up as if to ask, "Are you ready to shift your life in 1 second?" "Now," she said. "Now. Now." They unwrapped it on a patch of moss that made the whole thing feel oddly ceremonial. The tin had rusted only slightly, the seam intact. Inside, between 2 pieces of oil paper, lay a packet of documents that looked like they had waited near cold water their whole lives for this moment. Milo exhaled a single disbelieving curse that sounded like disbelief and relief braided together. Wren's throat made a sound too, something like a laugh that had forgotten how to stand up. On top, Elowen's hand again, blacker where the water had not kissed it. "Witness," it said. And below, a small list, July 1st, 1899. Original patent, North Pines parcel, recorded. September 2nd, 1905. Timber rights retained by grantor. Notation at margin, see clerk. February 17th, 1939. Attempted transfer by fraud, see notary sign with left hand. Evidence provided, photograph, signature mismatch analysis by schoolteacher E. Hallett. June 2nd, 1940. Affidavit by Jude Brenner, sealed. Wren's mouth went dry. Milo's eyes flicked to her, then to the third item again. "Photograph?" he said, so quietly the forest itself leaned closer to hear the next word. "Affidavit?" He turned the packet gently. There were, indeed, papers. Thin onion skin pages covered in Elowen's neat hand, an affidavit signed by Jude Brenner, one of the 5, the signature shaky but legible, witnessed by a reverend whose church Wren passed in town. There was a small photograph, black and white, corners scalloped, showing the 5 men, younger but with the same bones, standing outside the cabin, the Danvers with the oily hair and an angle of light that made him look both luminous and greasy. In the photograph, a man whose face Wren didn't know held a service notebook and a fountain pen in his left hand. The notary had signed right-handed on the deed, and here he was left-handed, caught unconscious in a photograph like the truth never realized in that moment that it had been seen. "You've got them," Milo said, reverent. "Elowen buried a case and you dug it up." Wren's vision blurred. She was suddenly so aware of her body, her aching back, the baby's foot pressing under her ribs, the way her knees dug into the moss and made small wet circles that would stain her jeans, that she could have wept just for the fact of being here. "We have to get this safe," she said. Milo nodded. "I'll call the county. I know a judge who still believes in old paper more than new influence. We need to file a notice of claim on record now, before Danvers moves another inch. We need to—" A branch cracked in the trees uphill. People always talk about hairs on the back of your neck rising like it's metaphor, but Wren felt it literal and immediate. She and Milo looked up, breath held. "What are you holding?" a voice asked mildly, too mild, and Holt Danvers Jr. stepped out from a stand of mountain laurel like he wore it as a coat. He was not wearing patent leather because times change, but his boots were good and new, and had never once done a day's work except stepping on someone else's. Beside him stood 2 of last night's men, the bearded one and the quiet, roped one, and behind them, in the trees, Wren sensed rather than saw the other 2 making themselves the woods themselves by standing still. Milo slid the papers into the tin as coolly as if he were folding up a takeout menu. He stood and put a friendlier smile on his face than he felt. Wren could tell by the way his hands didn't leave the packet even as he did it. "Mr. Danvers," he said. "Beautiful day." Danvers smiled his thin smile. "You know, some people don't think it's fair how the law moves so slow," he said. "I always say, the law's fair. Sometimes it just takes a minute to catch up." Wren felt the bear spray in her pocket like a promise. She also felt the land under her boots like a different kind of promise that said if you stand where you're meant to, the ground itself will hold you up. "We're going to the courthouse," she said, and didn't even try to make it sound like a question. Danvers stepped closer, looking at the tin in Milo's grip. "You know, Miss Alder, there's a lot we could do for a woman in your condition if you were amenable. There's a dollar amount that might ease this stress. Make it so you don't have to be very specifically threatened by men on my property," Wren said, and the way she sharpened each syllable made Danvers' mouth stop moving for a heartbeat. "I'm going to keep walking now," she said, because she had decided to be the kind of person who did not ask permission to live. She and Milo moved. Danvers did a small half-step like a dog stiffening at a squirrel, and then thought better of it because perhaps some animal part of him understood that a woman with a child under her heart who had just fished a history out of a spring did not hold fear in a way that would curve to his advantage. 2 weeks, he called after them. "Clock's ticking." "We hear it," Milo said accidentally cheerfully, because that was his particular kind of defiance, and Wren loved him for it in that second, like you love a stranger who holds the door at a moment you're carrying too much to do it yourself. At the county building, yellow brick that had seen many right fights and many wrong ones, they found Milo's judge, a woman with white streaks in her hair like lightning, who listened without blinking and then said, "Well, let's write it all down where it can't be pretended out of existence." She took the affidavit in hand like a person receiving communion. She pressed the photograph to a light box and peered at the notary's watch chain and its scratches, and then nodded once, decisively. "You'll file a petition for quiet title," she said to Wren. "We'll have a preliminary hearing 3 days from now." "I do not believe in miracles, Miss Alder. I believe in paper and the truth punched through it." "You're holding both," Wren whispered. "Thank you," and felt something in her unclench a degree she hadn't thought possible. Meters ticked in the town square, and the wind tugged flags on the Veterans Hall, and 2 blocks away, at the diner, Betty poured coffee for a man who would hear what happened in 5 minutes because towns are built on the economy of word. By the time Wren and Milo left the county building, the first text had reached the men who ran the school board and the gravel yard, although it reached them in different languages, one as a worry and one as a dare. Danvers heard it in the tone his assistant used when she didn't want to be blamed for how the world had turned. Wren heard it as a rumor she did not believe in, because she had Eowyn in her bone now, and bones don't lie. At the cabin that evening, Wren tucked the tin into a hole in the stone behind the stove, where Eowyn had left another mark that looked like nothing, until you bent your head the right way and let the light show you. She held Betty's thermos of stew in her hands and breathed in rosemary like it was a sacrament. She sat on the porch in the last rasp of sunlight and watched a red-tailed hawk tilt and tip over the trees with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Milo had gone home to call a lawyer friend who owed him 3 favors and 1 good beer. Wren found she missed the sound of him moving in the space as soon as the quiet swallowed his footsteps. She let the quiet settle back on her anyway. She wanted to get used to it being hers again. She was inside, locking the door, when a pair of headlights swung across the window and stopped. Her stomach dropped, and then righted itself when she recognized the soft crunch of tires on gravel as the opposite of Danvers' expensive, aggressive vehicles. She opened the door, and Betty stood on the porch with a bag of groceries and a look in her eye that said she was both an army and a grandmother, and she did not require permission. "You go making the county dust off its integrity. A body like me is going to bring you milk," Betty said. She set the bag down and took in Wren's face with a look that sorted through the day's emotion like a clean laundry pile. "Sit." They did. Betty told Wren stories about Iris, the way she'd read to children in the back of the diner on slow afternoons, the way she'd keep an extra pair of gloves behind the register for the old men who forgot theirs on the first cold day. Wren filed these away as if she could sew them into a coat for herself that would make her more than what she'd been told she was. "What do you know about Alowan?" Wren asked. Betty inhaled like someone had lightened her. "Thought I heard her name drifting out the courthouse today," she said. "Alowan Merritt was what my father called the good kind of difficult. She did not let the men be comfortable with what they did. Went away for a while when the cutting started. Came back when it ended like a storm breaks. She looked after things people thought didn't need looking after. Water, for instance, and children whose fathers drank the money. She had hands that could mend and a mouth that could cut when it needed to." "You know what happened to her?" Wren asked. "Left," Betty said, "then came back, then left again. People do that in this county like the ocean breathing." She looked at Wren and saw something that made her put a hand gently on Wren's forearm. "You'll make a different pattern," she said. "You got a reason." "I do." Wren's hand rose and fell over her baby again. 2 days later, at the preliminary hearing, Danvers brought a lawyer whose suit cost more than Wren's car insurance for a year. The lawyer's hair was perfect in a way that looked fragile under fluorescent light. He smiled at Wren, and Wren thought of Alowan's note about men who loved paper and forgot to love the thing it named. Judge Davenport, hair like lightning, listened. She tapped a pencil on her bench only once. She looked at the photograph, at the left-handed notary whose signature on the contested deed had been made right-handed, because the man forging it had been sloppy and had thought no one would look close enough. She looked at Jude Brenner's affidavit, brutal in its plainness. He had written that he had been a coward, and he had sworn that that would be the last time. He had written that Alowan was the kind of person you tried to be good for when she was in the room. "Motion granted," Judge Davenport said. "Preliminary injunction against any action on Parcel B, North Pines. And Mr. Danvers," she added, because she was old enough not to be afraid. "If any of your men step foot in Miss Alder's cabin without her invitation, I will jail them for trespass and you for contempt. Understood?" Danvers' lawyer's smile did not change, but something behind his eyes flinched. Danvers himself inclined his head like he was not used to the sensation of being told no. Wren felt 3 vertebrae in her back align like a lock clicking open. After, in the echoing marble of the courthouse hallway, Danvers glided up and said in a voice only Wren could hear, "You think this makes you safe?" Wren found that she liked the sound of her own voice when it said the thing inside her quietly and without heat. "No," she said, "I think it makes me brave." That night the men came back. Not into the house. They circled. Wren could feel them at the edge of the trees like rain waiting to start. She thought she would be unable to sleep and then discovered that there's a kind of tired that conquers even fear. She propped a chair under the door handle just in case, and the bear spray sat on the nightstand like another Bible, and she slept because her body insisted. She woke to voices and the sound of an engine idling and a light slicing through the window like a curiosity and not a threat. She was standing and at the window before she remembered waking, her palms pressed to the glass, her breath leaving its ghost. A truck idled in her yard. 3 men stood at its hood shining flashlights on what looked like a topographical map and a set of wrong plans. Wren did not like being hunted. She had learned that she didn't particularly like who she became when cornered, someone who either refused to speak or spoke with teeth. She accepted both of those as pieces of herself, then chose neither. She pulled on her coat, slipped out the back, and circled wide in the trees, moving as quietly as a person with decently worn boots and a baby could. When she reached the edge of the yard, she crouched. It was easier than she thought to be made of shadow. "This is the day to do it," the bearded one was saying. "She'll be at that ultrasound, we level it by sunset and leave a burned shell, and the judge can't put walls back up that aren't there." "No," the leader said. Wren recognized his shape now, even if his hat hid his face. It was the shaved head one from the first night. "We're not burning anything. We remove a structure for safety. That cabin doesn't meet code anyway. We've got a certified notice. We've got—" "What about the girl?" the young jittery one asked. "She's pregnant." The bearded one spat into the dirt and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You think I won't knock on the door and tell her to get out?" he said. "She'll cry. They all cry. Then they leave and I go home and eat my supper. Nothing personal." Something old and new at once rose in Wren, and she let it. She decided to be the person her aunt would have been proud of, and Alowan would have nodded to. She decided to make her move. She walked straight into the yard with her, head high, so the men had to look up at a person and not down at a problem. "You can come with a notice," she said. "You can come with a plan, but you do not come with a match." The young one flinched and looked around without knowing what he was looking for. Wren knew. He was looking for an escape route from himself. "Miss Alder," the shaved head one said. He tried to sound weary. He failed. "We didn't mean to disturb you." "I'm very disturbed," Wren said helpfully. "Disturbed enough to call every local I've met and ask them to stand in a circle around my house and sing hymns if I tell them to. Disturbed enough to call Channel 8. Disturbed enough to stand in front of your bulldozer and hold up 2 people you'll have to go through to get what you want." She put her hand on her belly in case they had missed the metaphor. "Try me." He looked at her, and something like respect did another small flare behind his eyes. Then he looked at the bearded one and the jittery one, and Wren watched him making calculations that had nothing to do with right and everything to do with risk. "We'll be back," he said, "with a marshal." "You do that," Wren said. "Bring someone honest enough to write down what happens." They left. Wren went inside and sat as the adrenaline receded, and then she shook again, and then she didn't, and the cycle was starting to feel like a new normal she didn't ask for. She distracted herself by making a list on a grocery bag. Call County Marshal's office. Ask for Ruthie. Ask her if she still eats pie at Betty's. Ask for her to come walk the line with me. Baby appointment Thursday. Ask about the cramp in my left side. Make sure they write down stress and housing insecurity, so it's on the record when I file for the tax delay. Call Milo. Ask him to bring the Old Town plats. We'll walk the property line with Ruthie. We'll give her paper and we'll give her a story. We will not let them pretend the story is nothing. She did those things. The marshal, a woman named Ruth Albright who wore her hair in a braid and took no guff from anyone, living or dead, came up with her clipboard and her eyes that took in everything. She walked the property with Wren and pointed with her pen to old carved marks on trees that no one had noted because they had not been posted on the internet for likes. She took photographs, real ones with a camera and a date stamp, and she made notes in a tight, clear hand. "I'll be at your meeting," she told Wren. I like singing hymns." Wren laughed, and the sound was something she hadn't recognized when she heard it in her own body, and she decided to keep it. The day before the county hearing, Wren found a new letter in the wooden box hidden under the floorboard. It had not been there before. It was old, that much was obvious. Elowen's hand, and the ink a shade that no longer existed. But the letter had lain under the first ribbon the whole time, and Wren had miscounted the pages because she had been too anxious to be careful. "Dear Iris," it said, and then, after a beat, "Dear you who loves this after Iris. I have torn pages because I know who reads. I have also left pages because I am not afraid. There is one more thing, because nothing is ever just one thing. The deed will put you in a room with men. What will save you is what it saved me to write, the story in your own mouth. Do not let them tell you you have it wrong because you were not there and you were not a man. You were here, that is enough." Wren felt like she had been handed a key that fit a lock she had been pounding on. The hearing was in the school auditorium because the courthouse had bad acoustics, and the superintendent believed in folding chairs. Half the town was there because Danvers made enemies with a smile and friends with a checkbook, and people in the county had decided they were going to stand and see which mattered more. Betty sat in the front row with a thermos. Ruth, the marshal, stood in the aisle like a reminder not to do anything stupid. Milo sat beside Wren and handed her a peppermint at the exact moment a wave of nausea hit like it had been rehearsed. Danvers' lawyer spoke first. He said all the things you say when you are dressed to say them. Wren's mind wandered over the cadence and the blazers and the way the microphone made the vowels sound like melted plastic. Then Judge Davenport called Wren, in deference to the case that had wedged itself into the agenda like a rock that wanted to stop the stream from forgetting where it used to run. Wren walked to the podium and set her papers down and adjusted the microphone with both hands like it was a baby bird. She thought of Elowen's letter and did the thing it asked. She told the story in her own mouth. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't turn to ask if it was okay. She talked about boots on her floor that didn't belong there. She talked about Elowen's fern. She talked about her Aunt Iris leaving her something more than a cabin, a chance to refuse a theft long after the thieves had stopped calling it that. 2 weeks ago, 5 men walked into my house, she said, her voice steady because she had practiced it steady in her kitchen all afternoon, as if she were teaching herself how to hold a note. They told me they were here to clean up paper. I am here tonight to clean up the story. Elowen Merritt did not hand men her miracle. She hid it where the cold keeps secrets. I found the proof. Mr. Danvers found me. And now I'm asking you to find yourselves. There was a sound then that was not polite. It was the sound a room makes when something in it is about to change shape. Danvers's lawyer stood to object. The judge, who had sat in a folding chair with the patience of a woman whose hair still remembered lightning, raised her hand and said, "No. The lady is speaking." Wren took a breath, like the first one you take after being under too long. "You can build a glamping resort somewhere else," she said. "You cannot build peace on a place that had it stolen. My aunt taught me to share. I will share this land with those who can name the trees. I will share it with bees and birds. I will share it with my child. I will not sell it to a man whose grandfather took it and thinks the name of it belongs to him because he said it long enough." People started to clap, awkwardly at first, then with hands that had forgotten how. It wasn't for her, it was for themselves. It had been a long time since they'd had a chance to applaud. Betty stood up like she had been waiting years to stand and didn't mind if her knees would complain all night. Ruth, the marshal, said, "Order," into the air and didn't mean it much. Danvers did something then that Wren did not expect, and later she would tell the story that way, about how she tried to see him as a person for a second because she refused to hate anyone more than she loved her own child. He came to the microphone and said softly, "Miss Alder, there's been a misunderstanding. We didn't want your cabin. We wanted to resolve confusion." He paused, a practiced beat. "We can offer you a settlement." The room made a different sound then. Money brushing up against decency. Wren surprised herself by smiling. "I'm grateful," she said, and meant it the way a person might be grateful when someone tries a joke at a wake. "But no, I'm offering you something instead." She lifted the tin like an old priest might have lifted a relic in a church where people remembered why they came. "I'm giving the deed to a land trust," she said. "I am going to keep 1 acre, the one with a view, and the house that smells like lilacs in the winter. The rest you will not be building on. We will. The we that includes my neighbor's kids and the turtles and Elowin's ghosts and anybody who needs to walk under trees to remember their name. If you want to be part of that, you can donate your proposed road money to trail maintenance. You can put your company logo on a bench if it will help you feel like you stayed." You could feel the shock move through the room like heat. The faces of people Wren had never met turned toward her like flowers finding the light. The school board man whispered to the gravel man. The gravel man whispered a curse that was not unkind. Milo pressed his fist against his mouth to keep from saying hell yes out loud. Danvers blinked. He had counted on her to be either poor or proud in the way that would make her take money. He had not counted on both of those things turning into a different thing entirely when they met in a certain kind of woman's chest. "You're turning down real money," he said, and it was not an argument so much as a prayer. "I am," Wren said, "so that my child has more than paper, so that he or she knows I did not take the short path that made me small." Betty cried then, not in a weeping way, but like water finds a low place and blesses it. The vote was not even close. It didn't matter right then, not legally, the judge would say, later patiently, and they would all nod and then text each other anyway, because there's a way a vote changes a world even when it doesn't. But the vote swayed men who had counted on momentum and found themselves falling in love with their own better natures. The rezoning did not pass. Danvers left with a face that looked like a sheet of paper, where someone had erased too hard and torn it. 2 nights later, around midnight, when the cabin had gone quiet enough to hear the expansions of the cooling stove as if it were breathing, Wren woke to a sound she did not like. The whine of a chainsaw in the distance, out of season, out of sense. She sat up, heart lapping hard, and then she did something that would be the thing people would say later with a tone. What she did to save her shocked everyone. She didn't call the sheriff, she didn't rouse Milo or Betty, she did not throw her body in front of a machine because she had already decided when she would not throw herself away. She picked up her phone and went live. It wasn't a thing she liked, it wasn't a thing she did, but she knew what people cared about when they didn't think they cared. They cared about a woman who looked like someone they might know, in a cabin that looked like a place they might have been happy, speaking softly into a screen at midnight when their own houses were quiet. She stepped onto her porch. The night was a cup she drank from and began to speak. "If you're awake," she said, "I could use you. I'm in North Pines, Oregon, in a little cabin my aunt left me. And someone is in the woods with a chainsaw who doesn't belong there. I am not going outside the circle of light, but I am going to tell you a story while we wait for the sound to stop. It's about a deed and about 5 men, and about a woman named Elowin who hid proof in a spring so cold you could rinse grief in it." People joined, because of course they did. They sent little hearts that floated up the screen like moths. They wrote from Kentucky and Bakersfield and a kitchen in Maine. "We're here," they said, the way humans are good at saying it when someone asks without saying help. Wren told the story. She spoke to her phone, to Ember, to Elowen. The chainsaw whined and then cut. Someone up there had either seen her light or seen their guilt. She kept talking. She told the truth like the letters were in her mouth the way seeds are before you plant them. She did not name Danvers. She did not need to. She named trees. She named Elowen in a way that baptized the air. In the morning, the video had 500,000 views, and then 1,000,000 more, because people share prayer as if it were gossip when it has a woman in it who looks like them holding her own line. The local paper wrote about it while pretending it was a cautionary tale about going live at midnight, and was secretly an invitation to remember you can choose courage. The national morning show called. Wren didn't call back. She didn't need to. She had wanted a room. She had one. Danvers learned what it felt like to be looked at by people who did not admire him. He decided at last, like a practical man, to stop pushing where the ground pushed back. He withdrew his application for rezoning because he said in his statement that it had gotten too politicized. He started a different project 2 counties over where the board did not remember their names as well as these people did. Wren took the deed to the new land trust office, which was for now a room above the diner Betty let them use because she liked it when paper and coffee and cause mixed. They signed papers in duplicate and triplicate, and the printer jammed once and everyone made a joke about how the world never makes anything easy. Wren kept 1 acre and a right-of-way and a right to the spring because she believed in living water. Ember didn't wait. Not long. On a storm day 2 weeks after the hearing, lightning walked across the ridge and the power went out. Wren breathed and breathed. Milo came with a bag he'd pretended he wouldn't need to bring. Betty came with hot water in a thermos. Ruth came because she liked to be where something right was happening if she could. The baby slid into a world that, while not perfect, had made a small place for decency and would keep making more if asked. "She's a girl," Wren said on a breath that was half laugh, half cry. Not a secret anymore. She looked at the tiny person and said, because it felt right, Elowen, and the 3 adults in the room who had seen a lot more than they had asked to see made noises like people making room for joy where it belongs. After, when the storm moved on and the cabin was just a cabin again, Wren sat in the rocking chair she'd found in the shed out back, paint flaked into a pattern that looked like someone had tried to keep the rain out with blue. The baby lay against her chest with her mouth turned up at one corner like someone already told her a joke she liked. The chair moved back and forth on the old furboards, making a small sound like a needle finding a groove on a record you loved. Milo stood at the window and looked out at the trees. "You know," he said, conversational, like this was a thing friends would say while looking at a miracle. "I've been thinking. There's a grant the state gives to places like this for restoration. It could fix the chimney, shore up that east wall. I could put together the application if—" "Yes," Wren said, smiling into the curve of her daughter's head. "You could, and then you can teach her how to read maps the way you do, when she can sit up, I mean." "Not before?" he said, mock offended. "Not before," Wren said, and the way the air between them held humor warmed her in a way the wood stove never would. Betty carried a basket of muffins in as if she had floated downriver into the room. Ruth wrote the time of birth on the back of a napkin, because a napkin is paper, and paper is still how you keep truth pinned down. The judge would come by later with a pie because she was the kind of person who believed in seeing what she'd helped shape. In the late afternoon, when the sun moved across the floor in a slow strip of gold that made the dust look like a galaxy again, Wren opened the trunk and laid Elowen's letters on the table. She read them out loud to the baby so the sound would stitch into the baby's idea of what language is for. Hope is a thing you put in a dark place, and trust to find its own way to light, Elowen had written in one of the last letters, and Wren thought of the spring and the tin and the way people had stood up in a room and made their own weather. That night, for the first time in months, she slept the sleep of a person who wasn't waiting for the other boot to drop, because all the boots were outside drying on the porch, and had been told they were glad guests, but they did not run the house. Winter came. Wren taught her daughter to watch snowfall like it was something you could learn from. She learned the sounds of the forest under snow, the way branches crack like knuckles, the way an owl's wing makes no sound at all. She walked the trail to Widow's Spring and set her hand in the water and did not flinch. She watched the beginning of the trail they were cutting for the trust and put in requests for benches where elders could sit and rest because she had learned things about tiredness she wanted to honor. Milo came and went, sometimes with maps, sometimes with stories from the courthouse, sometimes with his hand skimming the back of Elowen's fuzzy head like a person who had discovered a new religion he still felt shy about. They became the kind of people whose conversation could hold both grocery lists and a story from 1940 without dropping either. They did not rush into a word like love, because neither of them wanted to tie something fragile to something so heavy without being sure they were willing to carry it and not set it down. They used other words, like we, like ours, like later. Danvers' name did not disappear from town talk like Wren had half hoped and half known it wouldn't. Power lingers. But so does witness. When people said that was the woman who went live at midnight to keep her house, Wren did not wince at how odd that sounded even to her. She nodded. She said, "It worked because people watched." She said, "It worked because a woman named Elowen taught me to kneel." On a night in January when it felt like it might never be spring, Wren found one last note. Pressed into a crack in the beam above the stove, slipped there, where Elowen had put the mark. She saw the corner of the paper when the light hit right, because the light had changed with the snow outside, and it made everything show itself twice. "Dearest you," the note said, and Wren breathed at the moment she read it. The moment felt to her like someone had reached through time and touched the back of her hand. "I do not know your name. I do not know what you are afraid of. I know what I learned, that a woman with a house and a story is not a safe thing for men who make sport of forgetting. Keep the fire. Learn the creeks talk. Teach somebody behind you. You do not need my permission to be the one who does the first right thing in a chain of many. If it is winter when you read this, know there has never yet been a winter without a spring after it." Wren wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and laughed, because she had always been the kind of person who cried when she laughed and laughed when she cried, and she saw no reason to stop now. She lifted Elowen, the baby, and held her to the window to look at the muffled world. "That's a promise," she whispered into her daughter's hair, into the room, into the bones of the cabin, into the story she had stepped into and made her own. "We'll keep it. We'll keep it like we keep the fire. We'll keep it for anyone who comes after and needs to put down what they're carrying and take a second breath." In spring, the trails opened. People walked under the hemlocks and read small brass plaques that said, "In memory of a woman who hid a deed and found a future." In one corner of the property, by Widow's Spring, a bench bore a small metal plate that read, "Danvers Trail Stewardship Fund," because Wren had been practical and let him buy himself a penance that, while not sufficient, would hold a person's weight for a while if they needed to sit down. Milo planted a row of native ferns along the path and taught a group of third graders how to say Polystetium munitum and make it sound like a spell. Betty packed lunches for volunteer days, and Ruth brought her teenager to move rocks and not complain. And Judge Davenport walked slower than she once had, and stopped to rest twice and didn't feel bad about it, because she had decided to be kind to her knees. On a day when the light looked like it was made of honey, Wren took the tiny rocking chair someone had left on her porch. A gift from an anonymous person who had whittled their loneliness into kindness, and set it next to her own. Elowen toddled toward it and patted it like you pat a dog you love, and Wren cried again because it was a thing she did in the face of good. "I figured you'd do this, you know," Milo said, appearing in the doorway with dirt under his nails. "Give away the land, but keep the heart. Scared the hell out of Danvers, you know, and me. A little." "You'll get used to it," Wren said, amused. "I am," he said, and kissed the top of Elowen's head because that was safe ground, for now. That night, the three of them, woman, child, friend, sat on the porch while the light left the sky in a sensible way, and the air smelled like the first warm after the long cold, and somewhere in the distance, someone sang a piece of an old hymn that made Wren feel like she had been born to hear this exact note at this exact time. She had saved a house by telling a story. She had saved herself by letting other people come in when she wanted to push them away. She had saved a future for a child she hadn't met yet when she decided not to sell what wasn't hers to sell. It turned out the thing she did to save her had shocked everyone because almost no one expected a person to turn down the good money now for the better wealth later. But she did, and there it was. Later, rocking gently like a chair won't run off while you look at something else. When winter comes again, the cabin will still smell faintly of lilac. The stove will still tick as it cools. The beam over the stove will still have its 3 marks because the person who made them deep enough to outlast forgetting. Elowen will be a name in the house and a person on the floor with a mouth full of blueberry and a look in her eye like she has been told a good secret. Wren will stand at the window as the evening hangs its coat and feel full up, even on the day a bill comes due or a worry knocks. You could stand outside in the road in that deepening and look in at the woman in the rocking chair and the child on the rug and the man washing 2 cups at the sink and think, this is nothing much, and also this is everything. You would be right both times. And if the night leans in then and asks if she's afraid, Wren will shake her head in that patient way she learned from a woman on paper. Not today, she'll say, not here. We keep a different kind of fear in this house. We call it by another name. We call it care.